What's up,
like
everybody,
it.
and welcome to another exciting episode of the Calix and Crew podcast. I'm your host, as always, Doc Calix. We've got a very special episode today. I have an idol of mine, somebody that I really look up to, especially in the work that I do. We've got none other than the man himself, Heavy Dayze of the podcast. Let's all welcome Heavy Dayze. How you doing, buddy?
Thank you so much for having me, my friend. What a cool opportunity it is to be here on the show, and really stoked to be here to talk to you today. That was such a nice intro, man. I have to give you massive thanks for that.
Absolutely. I appreciate you taking your time to come out and spend this with me and get to know you a little bit more. Obviously, you've been doing this a lot longer than I have. So like I said, you're somebody that I've kind of looked up to in that aspect. Let's start from the beginning so I can get to know you a little bit more. When did you first get into cannabis? What was your first experience?
Great question. I think so. So my very first experience, my mother at the age of 30 has finally told me that she did have a joint when she was pregnant with me for morning sickness. So I guess I get to now be OG and say in utero, but I always remembered the Dragonfly guys said that, and I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. Anyway, so the first time I ever smoked weed, I think I had that pretty classic experience where you don't really get high because you're not really sure what you're doing, and you probably didn't really draw it down into your lungs. But then the next time I did, I got a little more high. But to me, sort of in that early period, the one that really stands out as super unique was me and some buddies were like in this little forest area near my house. I was lucky enough to grow up in an area called Tweed Heads, like shout out Tweed Breed, and basically really nice coastal town in Australia. And there was this little forest, and we had like found some shopping trolleys that were in the forest, and so like we just tipped them over on their sides. We had like this cool little makeshift couch, and we got super high. And basically, I think it was maybe one of the first or within the first few times I'd ever had like indoor weed, because in Australia, outdoor is quite common. And if you're like a young person, beggars can't be choosers, you're probably getting a lot of bushweed. So I had this sort of potent indoor stuff, and I got so high. I remembered looking at my buddy sitting on the shopping trolley cart with, the trees as the backdrop behind him, and very distinctly saying to him, like, oh man, like you got a green screen behind you, like that, the trees in the back, that's not real, man. That's a green screen. I can see the outline around you. It's fake. And I guess in retrospect, it was sort of the first real psychedelic experience, because I'd gotten high, but like I was truly like having some visuals, and I guess a reflection of having such a low tolerance. But that one always lasted with me. I loved it. And then one other one, which I'll mention, which I haven't really mentioned before, was, as I was mentioning, we were getting a lot of bushweed, right? Like, and the Australian bushweed is largely speaking heirloom Thai varieties. So they're like these big Thai varietals that handle the heat and the humidity really well. You get huge yields off them. Unfortunately, they didn't quite have that Thai effect that you would hope for, like this really nice, connoisseur sativa sort of thing. So it wasn't quite the high, but it had most of the other characteristics. So one time I get this batch of weed, and it's distinctly minty in smell. I'd never had anything like it, very minty. And it looked like essentially what sort of Thai sticks look like nowadays. And I hadn't really experienced that. So I tried this stuff, and it was truly memorable, but I never had the words to describe why I liked it so much. And looking back, it was because it was uplifting and creative and really fun. And me and all my friends had it at a party. It was a great time. So I think when I first got into weed, I sort of didn't think I had these very interesting stories. And then the more I thought about it, I'm like, no. Like, I guess I have had some cool stuff happen. So that would be how I sort of first got into it.
Awesome, man. And you've come such a far way since that moment. You're doing more than I even knew about. Honestly, I didn't pay that much attention to podcasts when I started doing this maybe a couple years ago. I'm still pretty fresh at it. But it's funny when I get people ask me, what podcast do you listen to, Doc? And it's like, I really don't listen to podcasts. It's kind of a weird thing that I do this, and I don't really listen to very many, but one of the ones that I am always consistent of is the podcast. And that's because I've always
Oh.
appreciated you as an interviewer. You're very articulate. You get very deep into things that mean a lot to people like you and people like me that actually grow this plant, steward this plant, and love and have a passion for it. So we can speak from that perception, of like the home grower. So it's
Mm,
really cool seeing you get in with some of the biggest names in cannabis, especially people that I would just dream of fucking talking to. And you have this
mm,
amazing catalog build up from you doing this over the years. How did we go from your first experience with cannabis
mm.
into I'm going to create a podcast and this is where we're going to go with it? Okay, I
Oh.
guess the good question would be, how did a man from Australia, where this is such a hard fucking thing to, be public
Mm.
with, go from that to becoming the podcast?
Oh, again, man, I got to start off like thank you. I got to keep my head from getting too big. You're giving me too many compliments, but I really do appreciate that you take the time to listen to the show, and I totally understand what you're talking about. Like when you're running a show, sometimes you get like audio fatigue, and it's almost hard to find the mental space to listen to other stuff. So I totally get you. There's still a few shows I listen to. I try to stay in touch with all the guys who I'm homies with. So like yourself, Do Grow Show, the Breeder Syndicate, Adam Dunn. Those are sort of the staple ones I check out for sure. But I think your question is good. I've thought about that myself. I think that there's a lot of factors at play, and it plays into what you said. Part of my success has been the momentum I got from certain episodes, and I really want to acknowledge that I was very lucky to get certain guests, and that gave me a certain amount of momentum that I think I wouldn't have had otherwise. So definitely want to acknowledge that, and I think the obvious one would be, I think the first two episodes really set me up to be able to approach other guests. But to get more to the heart of your question, how did I go from being like sort of this guy in Australia to doing the podcast? I think situationally there wasn't too many podcasts at the time, so I had made the transition from like a smoker to a grower, and I was watching the Weed Nerd. I was watching Emerald Cup talks. There was this one that used to be up about the Rev talking about just giving organics a try, and that sort of is what got me into organics. And then I would watch Subcool, and I'd use his super soil recipe. So I'd sort of watch these different programs, and I was just learning. I wasn't growing particularly great weed at the time, very much still learning. And after a while, I sort of felt like I had watched all of the content on like YouTube that I could sort of get my hands on that was interesting. And I felt like there was a really good amount of information for entry level growers. But at a certain point, I was looking for more advanced sort of content. And the name's on the tip of my tongue. I really want to give him a shout out. It was a guy from Portland. I'm gonna at some point in the episode, I'll remember and I'll chime in and say it. But there was one guy I used to watch, Medicropper. That was his name, Medicropper. I liked his content. I felt like it was like a little more targeted, a little more advanced. But basically, I just sort of looked at it and I was like, hey, it seems like there's a bit of a vacuum here. There's a lot of great content for entry level people, but there's not too much intermediate stuff and there's nothing advanced really. And I don't know if I'd put my show in the category of advanced. I'd say it's probably more intermediate in the grand scheme of things. But I just thought, you know what? Like, no one's doing it. So that's really advantageous, right? Because they can't compare you to anything. So like that's helpful. It makes your thing better if it's hard to judge it. So I thought to
Absolutely,
myself,
man.
right, yeah. So I thought let's do it, and I started messaging people, and like no one really got back to me. And I think that was because I can't remember how I was approaching people, but
What year
I
was this?
based good question. 2015, I think.
Wow.
2015. So I should give a little more context. In the 2 years prior to that, I had started an Instagram and I was trying to be active in the Australian community. And I was just giving away seeds and I was just hoping some people would grow them. So I was making seeds before I started the show. And part of my motivation to start the show was that I just legitimately had a bunch of questions I wanted to ask the big breeders. And I knew that I think I tried typing some out one day, and after I got to like a page worth of questions, I was like, no one's gonna like, if I got an email like this, I'd be like, no way, too hard basket. Um, so I sort of thought a podcast was an interesting way to circumvent that, excuse me, and essentially be able to like ask a whole bunch of questions to someone, but because it's recorded, everyone gets to benefit from it, and the breeder's more likely to be like, yeah, I'll give that a go. So there was a few considerations at play, but I thought like it could work. And at the time, I was like, and even up until a bit more recently, I was like toying with like stand up comedy, and so like I sort of had an idea of how to talk to people and how to make it work. So I just thought let's just try to blend it all together. Oh, and then the final thing was I've always enjoyed producing music in my spare time. I like playing music. I like writing music. So I had like the audio know-how to be able to like put. So I was really lucky in that I sort of felt like there was these three or four different pieces of the puzzle, and I just like coincidentally had them all. So I was like, okay, I can on a technical level, I can make the show and all that. So yeah, I'm emailing people, a ton of responses from people. And then I eventually just started talking to Duke Diamond, and he was sort of obviously incredibly generous and nice with his time. But he sort of, I asked enough questions that he was like, okay, like, I don't think this is going to be terrible. And he jumped on, and we did that first episode, and it sort of all went from there. And I have to be honest, I never anticipated it was going to be as successful as it was. I remember I sent the first episode to my friends and like cannabis friends, and they were all like, "Oh yeah, that's really cool, man. Like, where'd you find it or whatever?" And I was like, "Oh, that's me." And at the time, they'd never heard my voice, so they didn't. And they're like, "That's not you." And I was like, "Yeah, yeah. Like seriously, I'm gonna try to do this show, you know." And so it was a huge surprise to all of us that it went so well. But definitely a labor of love, and one that sort of really took off with a lot of its own momentum.
That's really, really cool, dude. I had no idea that you did any of the audio editing or anything like that. You said you were musical as well. What do you play?
Oh yeah, look, I try to be in my spare time. I play guitar and I play bass, and on a good day I like to think I can play drums, and on a very good day I can maybe play a bit of piano. So nothing. I'm sure everyone out there who plays an instrument could probably play it better than me on their instrument, but I can play a few, which is helpful. And then I don't really say it too much, but like any of the music or anything you've ever heard in the show is just like stuff I've made in my spare time. So yeah, I like to do a few different things. It just helps me relax. I find I love music for that.
Are you telling me right now that all the music that you hear on the podcast you've created?
Yeah, bro. Yeah.
The bird noise is everything.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, you just record that, right? Like I just recorded that in the field.
Yeah. Still,
Yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
really amazing, man. I don't think my audio skills are up there, but I think it's really cool that you and I play the exact same instruments. So yeah, I'm not a
Oh,
master at
bless.
any of them, but I would say guitar is my main, my main circumvent. Um,
Hell yeah.
but yeah,
Are
play
you
the
a?
same instruments. We both dabbled in audio before we got into this. It's pretty damn cool, man. I've
That's
got a
it.
couple questions I wanted to get through really quick right here from our
Yeah.
Patreon members.
Let's do it. Let's do
Uh,
it.
Dank Magician says, "What is your favorite guest you've had a chance to interview?"
Oh, Dank Magician, thank you for the question. It's one that I am always like battling myself internally because I got a bunch of favorites, and people always say to me like, "What's your favorite?" I think undeniably a lot of people really enjoyed the Chimera interview because it was probably one of the few interviews I did that does fall into that more advanced category. And so that was quite memorable because I was able to have quite a high level discussion with someone about genetics. So that was really cool. On a personal level, I really like episode 40 by Always Be Flowering he had some very, very modern takes on a lot of issues, and I listen to it now and I could totally believe it was recorded yesterday. Like everything he says is still so incredibly relevant and accurate. And he talks about strains that are like still in the common zeitgeist of like hype stuff today. And this interview was done like 3+ years ago. I really like that. And his whole thing that I took away from that was like, rather than getting mad at these other dudes, like, secure your own bag, like, don't get angry at someone else doing it. Like, for the most part, do your own thing. So I really love that. The Skunk VA episode, I think, is a brilliant one because he's a fantastic storyteller, and largely speaking, the episode is just him recounting his life story, as opposed to other episodes where like we talk a little bit about your life and then like a whole bunch about breeding and stuff. He was just largely speaking just telling you his life story, which I thought was incredible. So those ones would be up there for sure. But I'm also going to throw out a controversial one. I absolutely love the Masonic one. It was such a different perspective, and I try to do the show as like I try my best to just not be too fussy with like. There's a lot of people who'll be like, "Oh, don't get such and such on. I don't like them," and I try not to listen to that sort of stuff too much and just get anyone on who I'm genuinely interested in. And I'm really glad I got Masonic on because his views are so like contrary to the common answers you hear for questions about breeding, about collaborations, things like that. So I think it was very different, probably very polarizing, but I did enjoy that one. I have to admit.
Do we've all got what we like and what we don't like, but as
Mm.
our job as podcasters is not deciphering that. It's
Mm.
interviewing these people, taking in their perspective and how they view the world, and then letting the viewers decide for themselves. So yeah, I completely respect that. Patreon member Stone Stew says, does he remember there being name strains back in the day? Or like where I grew up, it was just weed or orange bud, purple bud, etc., etc. What was the
Yeah,
name
great
for your swag weed back then?
Oh, look, I didn't get named weed for the most part. There was one or two instances where I got better quality weed and I was told that it was white rhino. More recently, when I'm like, in the cannabis scene and had some really good white rhino, I can't exactly vouch that the stuff I had back then was white rhino, but I guess that would be something which among my friends circle growing up, it was always touted like, "Oh, bro, white rhino, white widow, man, fuck, those are the strongest strains on earth if you can get them." Surprisingly, I never got anything that was called Mullumbimby Madness, even though I grew up not that far, probably about 2 hours or so from sort of that area. So, yeah, surprisingly, never got given that. But yeah, definitely, I remember White Widow, White Rhino were said to be the best thing ever. And then I remember when I turned 18, I went to Amsterdam, I tried White Rhino, White Widow, and I remember thinking, I've had other stuff here that was stronger. I think Soma's Sour Diesel, Soma's Diesel. I thought was better. So there you go. Hopefully that answers it for you, my friend.
Hell yeah. I have to ask for myself, did you ever have any encounters being in that region with the PNG?
I don't, in my heart of hearts, I don't think so. I wish I could have. It's like it's the Moby Dick, man. I'm chasing it. Everyone says it's the best, but yeah, I'm just not sure. I got a buddy of mine who says he might have some seed stock, but I think you'd have to grow it outdoors. It's meant to be so gnarly.
Yeah, especially something that's become acclimated to that region for so long.
Yeah,
So,
it'd be.
doing what you do, was there ever any major worry about being in the public eye? I
Yeah,
mean,
man.
obviously, still now, but was there ever a point where you were like, "Fuck, maybe I should quit this, or maybe I should slow down"? Did you ever have any doubt in what you were doing?
Yeah, a few times. I think my barometer has always been my girlfriend. I've largely speaking, when I first got into cannabis, I was with this really great girl who allowed me to do a lot of growing, even though she wasn't a smoker. And I will always be grateful to her for that. And then I've also been with my wife. So over the whole time the public has known me, I've only ever been with those two women, and they would always be the one who would tell me when I'm getting a bit too grandiose with how many plants I've gotten, maybe railing it in a bit. So I do need to give a shout out to them for being the voice of reason. However, there have certainly been times where I've been concerned. I've always said to people, look, I've actually never had any issues, and I think the reason for that is pretty simple. I absolutely do not associate with anyone who sells or uses hard drugs. Now, I don't want to go into the ethics of like, anything about that really. Like I think drugs should probably be legalized and stuff. But everyone I knew who ever got in trouble, it was always through that, right? And so I just thought, as a point of precaution, purely speaking, I would limit my social circle in that regard. And as a result, I've actually never had any issues. And I think that sort of speaks volumes for itself in a sense. So there have been times when I have been a little bit worried about being a bit too public. Like maybe, the podcast, it's out there, the Australian police could look it up and decide maybe they want to try to find out who does that. But I don't think they are, because they, largely speaking, have come out on the public record. They've done like AMAs on Reddit, surprisingly. But they've done AMAs, and people have asked them, like, do you trawl through the cannabis subreddits? Do you trawl through cannabis forums, blah, blah, blah. And they were just like, we don't have the resources, like we're too busy trying to stop murders and rapes. And if something gets put in our lap, if your neighbor calls us up and says they saw it, like, sure, we'll do something, but we're not putting any resources into it. And so for me, I think that bit of knowledge in combination with that little bit of precaution I take is, largely speaking, being able to keep me on the pretty straight and narrow, so to speak, because I'm sort of like not really bothering anyone. And like, and the other thing I should mention is, like, I don't sell weed. That's like a big thing, I think, for me, which helps. Like I don't sell any weed, period. Like, I sell seeds, but I don't sell weed. So I think that helps as well, because yeah, it's a different clientele.
Yeah, it's a good mindset to have. And that's been something that's helped me out as well, obviously it's much more accepted over here, but where,
Mm.
back in the underground days, there was no regard as to a plant count. If you were going to get busted with 10, you were going to get busted with 100. You were going away either way, no problem. So where there was kind of disregard for that, then it kind of came into this podcasting, and everybody's like, oh, when are you going to be, hunting, 5 different land races and shit again? I'm like, I just don't have the heart with what I'm doing now to be like that anymore. Not
Mm.
associating with people that do hard drugs. We definitely share that one in common. And I am a firm advocate of depenalizing the plant, where it's not something that anybody profits off of. Sure, there's offshoots like podcasts and things like that, but the actual product itself, I would rather see it like tomatoes in your garden than anything else. And I'd rather see neighbors sharing it amongst each other. You want to try some of the sour diesel, you want to try some of this rude boy, whatever. And that's how it should be. It should be a gift. It should be something that's shared. And that's kind of my perspective on it.
Yeah, man, fully. It's an interesting one. I still am not sure 100% where I land on that one, but what I can definitely say for sure is it seems like the 215 model was superior to what Australia has now, or what California has now. Like, where like home growers are supplying dispensaries, and then other people can get it from there. Like, to me, that model sounded really quite sound. Um, and it's unfortunately not the case in Australia. There's only a few big producers, and they don't do a particularly good job at it. But hopefully that changes in the future.
I've not heard good stories yet. I know a couple Australian growers over there. I know a couple medical patients that have gotten that stuff, and they say they'd rather get stuff off the street most of the time because it was better quality than the stuff that they were getting uh, access to.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. In my opinion, and it's pretty well regarded as, like, it's the general consensus. The best quality stuff you can get in the Australian medical system is imported from Canada. And so what that indicates, like, it's not the best, like the best is staying there. I joke around with people. I say, man, we're getting like the floor scrapings, and yet that's the best you can get. So it's such an indictment on the quality of the domestic produced stuff. Admittedly, the companies are new. These Canadian companies have been around a long time, so they've sort of got the production down a little better. But so much room for growth, and there are some companies doing some cool stuff in that space. I've heard of a few things, but yeah, such a long way to go.
Our Patreon member Green Witch says, "Have you ever interviewed anyone that pissed you off and you hung up? If so, who was it?" I don't know if he wants to answer that one.
No. That's fine. I guess, like, let me answer that question and say, yeah, definitely. There are times when people say things that I'm definitely like, that's not my view, and I generally wouldn't. I would hope that you don't notice those moments, because my goal is that you don't pick up on that. However, as a point of sort of journalistic integrity, something I realized very early on in the show was that um, plenty of opportunities to, like, sort of try to voice your own opinions and stuff. So, for example, I might have asked someone to come on the show, and, like, maybe they said yes and then, like, never turned up, or maybe they never replied. And, like, there have been times when I've, like anyone, in a moment of weakness, you want to leave a snarky comment or something like that, but you got to rise above that and recognize that if you say one thing, or if, like, right now I were to say, yeah, this guest said this, blah blah blah, then any potential guest in the future will you sort of lose integrity with them, because the guest needs to ultimately trust that anything they're not comfortable with will be removed, that you're not going to try to make them look too bad. So 100%, man, there have been people who have said some shit that I do not agree with, and unfortunately I can't tell you their names.
Exactly. Much respect on that one, man. So let's talk about breeding really quick.
Yeah, cool.
That's not something I knew about until fairly recently.
Mhm.
How long have you been doing that?
Yeah, good question. Probably the first intentional seed cross I made was probably 2013, 2014. And
Wow.
then I don't think I made one for another year or so. I tested some of those seeds and I just kept growing. What I did was I did this cross very early on into my growing career. So I can say, yeah, I made this cross all the way back then. But I then recognized that there was no point breeding when I was still growing relatively shit bud. And so I just needed to learn to grow better weed first. So basically, the cross I made was Dynafem's Strawberry Amnesia crossed to a Blue Ox male by Rare Dankness. And I just jokingly called the name Blue Strawberry because it's like it never got out. I never really did much with it, so it was just easy. Even though I'm sure there are strains called Blue Strawberry. Anyway, it was a really nice plant. It ended up making these really sativa bodied plants. They had the strawberry amnesia structure, but then they had like this sort of indica potency from the blue ox. The blue ox was like a blueberry cross to Bubba Kush sort of thing. So real indica meets sativa hybrid. Really cool plants. I found this one keeper pheno I still daydream of. It was like strawberry flavor with like true vanilla. I've never had it outside of this one plant, but like true vanilla. As I said, I daydream about this thing. And anyway, yeah, that was the first cross I did. And then it was a few years later. At that time, I was studying my undergraduate degree, which was it was a Bachelor of Science, and I had two majors. I did one in chemistry and one in molecular biology and genetics. So I had an idea of what I was doing, but I wasn't growing great bud. So then I just focused on growing good bud. Took me about a year, got better progressively, and then I started breeding again. And I'm really stoked to say that some of those earliest crosses are the things I'm working on now. And this would play into something I would recommend to people. I'm trying to get back to that point because the period of time I'm talking about, I didn't have as many preconceived ideas about genetics back then as I did now. And I picked stuff that it was interesting. The descriptions were cool. It was like something I'd never heard of. And I truly think that like some of the crosses I made with that sort of stuff are the most interesting to me because A lot of it was unintentional. I might have bought a certain pack of seeds going, yeah, let's breed with this. And then something else happens to produce a male that's really interesting. And you're like, you know what, this might actually be better. So I encourage it, and I myself am trying to do it, where I'm trying to get back to like almost like not looking at the breeder and just reading the strain descriptions and just looking at the parents and trying to just pick stuff that's different. Because what I'm telling people these days in regards to breeding is like, you can't compare to JBZ's Kush Mint's reversal. So don't hedge your bets and try to do a Kush Mint hybrid. There's already people doing it. Like maybe instead try to do something that's totally different, because people will genuinely be interested if you're like, yeah, I use this blue amnesia, this strawberry amnesia across to this blue ox thing, and you've probably never heard of either of those, but it's a nice plan, I assure you. I think that's a way forward for people who feel like we're in the corner of genetics and are not entirely sure where to start. I would say start by just picking stuff that's cool.
That's cool that you brought that up. I haven't heard the Blue Ox name for a while, but that was one that I was really interested in. I never got to grow very much of Rare Dankness's stuff.
Mm.
I should say Scott. Uh, but that Blue Ox, that was one that really excited me. The only one I ever grew was the Ghost Train Haze. And
Ooh,
that one died
yum.
off for me after a while. It was all right to begin with, and then it just kind
Yeah.
of peaked out. There was another one about that time. I want to say it was called Night Terror.
Yeah, yeah, yep.
Okay. That one was one that I'd probably still grow that to this day. I've been kind of looking at.
Nice
So out of
one.
everything that you've made, what are some of the standout ones to you? What are you most proud of? Like, if I was going to say Heavy Days, you've got 3 strains that you can take and say, I want this to represent my genetics.
Oh, great question. Okay, so the first one, which most people would be aware of with my work, would be the Raspberry Mama. Basically, this is a Phantom Kush F2. So I got a pack of Phantom Kush from Ken's GDP. It's pink champagne crossed to Ken's Kush. I popped the seeds. I found a mother that was very pink champagne leaning and a father that had the same structure, appeared to be very pink champagne leaning. I bred those together. So I made F2s. And then from that, popped seed, found a mum that was just entirely what I was looking to find, right? It's just basically pink champagne. So then I got that in like 2016 and I sort of established myself with it. It's like this really nice indica cushy thing with like a baked raspberry tart sort of vibe, a bit of champagne to it. Really nice perfumey cannabis. It's not going to put you to sleep, but it's like, to me, I describe it as the perfect afternoon weed. It's like it's going to take the weight off your shoulders, but still leaving you able to get up and do stuff. But you're just like, oh, I don't feel like it's the end of the day. I feel sort of nice. And it was really good for anti anxiety. At the time, I was having like sort of sporadic general anxiety. And so it would just hit it on the head. So I loved it. So I made some hybrids with that in like 2017, maybe 2018, 2017, I think. And then it was only a very small, limited production. They never got out too far, but a few people who got those seeds, like they still hang on to the cuts, and a few of them have made their way back to me, which is really nice. And I did hybrids, I did S1s, and then I had to move. And in the process of moving, I lost the mum. And it was crazy because I thought I had it backed up with friends, but then it turns out like they had lost it as well. And I was shattered and I lost it. And then fast forward a few years, a good buddy of mine, Feral Genetics, he popped some of those seeds. He popped the S1s. It turns out I gave him some and I sort of forgot. He's like, yeah, man, I grew them out. Like, not only do I have them, I've already grown them out. I didn't tell you. I popped them 3 months ago and they're ready. They're ready to harvest. And one of them is insane. You got to come look at it. And I was like, oh, yeah, because he had never seen the mum. So I went there and I smelled it. I was like, holy fuck, dude, that's exactly it. Like, not 9 out of 10 it, like 10 out of 10 it. And more importantly, it was dark. The bud was purple. And I for the life of me, I could never have gotten Raspberry Mama to go purple. She was just like this green, cushy plant. So as far as I was concerned, this pheno is better because it's everything the mum had, but it goes purple really easy. So that was pretty cool. And so I got that, and I've been doing work with that. But it's still that S1 he found. It's still just one of my favorite plants. So definitely the raspberry mama, which a lot of people don't know what pink champagne is. Think of like a cherry pie sort of thing, like a unique berry tart perfume sort of vibe. So it's similar to cherry pie in my opinion. So that would be the raspberry mama. The next one would be the jelly breath that I found from in-house genetics. I've then worked that into a BX2 line. So that would be the other one because it's a really solid line. In-house has done his own jelly breath work, but it uses a different cutting. And I've spoken to both him and the guy who found the cutting, Two Tone Willie. It's called the North Cascade cut of jelly breath. Anyway, mine's totally different. Their one
Very
leans towards
popular
the
up here.
yeah. So it's like more of like a dosey do leaning pheno or like a 50-50, whereas my jelly breath is almost 100% mendo breath dominant. So it's a very different plant despite having the same name. And so my jelly breath work is quite different to in-house's jelly breath work. But that would be the other one. So the BX2, which is really cool. And admittedly, that is, obviously in-house's work, but I feel like I've worked it into a pretty consistent BX2 line, this particular pheno. And then the final one would be the dog jelly, which I made more recently using that jelly breath mother I referenced, and then crossing it to some seed stock. I was incredibly lucky to get our buddy Duke Diamond. So he gave me a Chem D crossed to the local H. And I think he said to me he only gave it to like 3 or 4 people, and I was one. I found a really nice male. I hit it to the jelly breath and made this strain I call dog jelly. And it's beautiful, man. It's like cookies and like super loud chem dog and gassy. It's a really special one to me, and I've done my best to really get those clones out. I found a few phenos that were really nice, and I've been giving them out to people all around Australia. And I'm starting to see it pop up more and more, and I think it would be really cool to get it out more. So I'm going to sort of do my best to do that. So that would be my three: the Jelly Breath BX2, the Raspberry Mama, and the Dog Jelly.
And do you have those available in both regs and fems? Because I know that you were doing fems.
Yeah, great question, man. So I have done the FEMS, and when I was talking about historically having done the Raspberry Mama FEMS that made the S1s, which then gave birth to the plant I use now, I made all the crosses back then with the intention of trying to do reg versions of them thereafter. So at the moment, as you referenced, I've femmed the Keeper Mother onto my other Keeper Mothers, and you got the Fem crosses. But I'm also in the process of working regular lines of those out. I do regular crosses in general. I've done some different work with some different males, but I specifically wanted to do like a regular release of the fem line I released because I was lucky enough. When my buddy found that S1 of the female, he also found like a male in that pack. And we were sort of quite suspicious at first, and we were like, maybe it's like pollen contamination, maybe it's something weird. But we sort of stress test this male, and it dead set would not show you what sex it was until you actually put it into flower and let it go for a few weeks. So my thought process is like there's a chance, it's a small chance, but there's a chance that is in fact a male from femstock, which is known to happen. Sam the Skunk Man spoke about it, and very low chance. You're only meant to
I've
see
had it
like
myself.
three. Oh, cool. Right on, man. Maybe you can tell me about it because I'm just trying to figure out if it's real or not really. But yeah, what
Oh,
was your
absolutely.
experience?
I mean, you never know what's unless you're packaging them yourself. If you were in that grow yourself, you don't know what
Mm,
happened. Maybe a bean rolled off the counter from a different one.
mm.
You don't know what their process is like. But I've definitely had a 6-pack of fems. I believe that was, I think those were Alaskan Thunderfuck, and one or two of them popped up male. I think it was just one. I think it was just the one.
Cool. Cool. Did you ever do anything with it, or it was just sort of like a cool
Oh no,
thing?
I got rid of it right away. Yeah, no, I was like, well, that's not what I was looking for. I mean, most
Yeah.
that market in itself, the feminized seeds, those people are looking for a very specific thing, you know. These are people with low plant counts or that just want to
Mm,
guarantee females in their grow. So when that pops up, it was just automatic. No, no, not at all.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that for sure. But yeah, looking to maybe cross that male to the same mothers, and then see, do those resulting seeds bear any resemblance to the feminized ones I made? Obviously, it's a different plant, but it's from the same strain. So you'd think like it should be like just some basic similarities, just enough to be able to be like, yeah, that doesn't seem like it's contaminated pollen and it's totally something different.
Can I ask you a very controversial question?
Hit it. Let's do it.
How do you feel about breeding regular seeds with feminized seeds?
I look. I think the devil's in the detail, right? But as a rule of thumb, I would say that it appears fairly certain from empirical evidence that you can breed, like you can get a mother from fem stock and then fem that onto other stuff. Doesn't seem to inherently increase the rates of hermaphrodism. You can selectively see it, but you don't see it across the board because people like Canorado, that's his whole business model is like make a series of fem hybrids, phenohunt them. The best one is the one we reverse for the next round of fem hybrids we make. And the same is said for compound genetics. And it just doesn't seem that the empirical evidence is there that enough people are putting their hands up and saying, hey, this is like, I'm getting at least one herm a pack or something, you know. And I sort of joke around with people and say that I think you should honestly go into every pheno hunt with the expectation that one plant will herm because A, it's not that high of a bar. You know, you should give people a little bit of slack. You know, plants herm every now and again, and it just happens. But on top of that, any more than that, and you can start to have some, questions that are not unreasonable to be asking. You know, if you're getting two herms in a pack, maybe there is something unstable about those genetics. But and then if you're getting 10 herms in a pack, it's probably on you, bro. Check for light leaks. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting topic. I do suspect that if you femmed onto fem for like forever, then like yeah, you might see some deviation in the way the genes express themselves in terms of sexual stability. But I don't think we're there long term. And it seems as though like enough sort of fem stuff happens that you know if it is increasing the rates of hermaphrodism, it's happening very slowly, and we haven't, in my opinion, we haven't yet truly detected it. And I think it's just more anecdotal, you know. Like I honest to God feel like I get less herms now than I ever have. Maybe that's a reflection of my
Oh,
environment being more dialed, but yeah, at the moment, I would happily pop seeds that are like fem onto fem, and I would happily make those sorts of seeds and sell them. So long as I was confident they were stable and that everyone sort of knew what they were. In my most recent seed release that I did, the sort of version twos of the Raspberry Mama Fems, I wanted to make it very clear that the plant I was reversing was an S1. You know, so I think I did make that very clear in a number of ways, in terms of like if you read the descriptions on the posts and the actual infographics and all that. But yeah, I just think like as long as you're upfront about it, like this, that it's really up to the consumer to decide. And I myself as a consumer, don't I would run Canorado, I would run Compound. I don't think it's going to be Herm City, so to speak.
very, very good answer. And I appreciate your honesty on that one. Okay. One of our Patreon members, Dank Magician, wants to know what solution do you use for your reversals?
Nice one. Good question. I have used Matt Wright's reversal spray in the past and had success with it. I would recommend that spray. I more recently have used a local option, which was um, just in the past when I've used Matt's spray, it's been very successful for me. But it comes from America, you know, it takes a few weeks to arrive, and sometimes I'm not as organized as I should be, and I don't have a few weeks, unfortunately. So I've been using some more local options, which I've had some good success with. My buddy has a company called Old Sod's Reversal Spray, and that's an Australian-based company that you can use who do a really nice STS solution. It's made fresh when you order it, and you can also have the option of mixing it yourself if you'd like. I've had good success with that. And I've also used another product by a buddy of mine called Feral Genetics. I've mentioned him a few times. He also sells an STS solution. I think it's a slightly different formulation. And I've had success with both of those products. So if you're an Australian person, definitely check out those two guys. They've got great products. I would be really interested in using Hybridex's solution, which is the cobalt chloride solution, as opposed to a sodium thiosulfate. So I'm keen to give the cobalt chloride solution a go. I've heard nothing but great things about Hybridex's product, which is that. But I've also had great success with STS. I've never used colloidal silver, and I don't think I ever will because I just hear like it's a bit finicky, the application. You got to use it constantly, and just seems like less efficient to me.
How often are you using that one?
Sorry, which one are we talking about specifically?
The one that did you say you were using the cobalt recently?
No, I would like to use that, but I haven't. But apparently, it's literally a once application. I've spoken to, I can't remember who it was. It might have
Wasn't
been Skunk
riots a one
VA.
time?
So they all say one time,
Okay.
but I tend to use an STS spray a couple of times just to really ensure you're saturating all those nodes, because it's really like that axial branching node point that you really want to try to saturate. So I go against the rules and I apply STS a few times and I don't see any negatives to it, and I like to think it slightly increases my chance of getting a successful reversal. However, I've been told on quite good authority that cobalt one, you really only need to apply it one time, as Hybrid Tech advertises, because apparently, like, it stresses the plant out a bit if you apply it a number of times. I've seen some very frazzled looking plants. And the other thing to quickly mention, because people may not know this until they've done a few reversals. The first reversal I ever did went reasonably successful in the grand scheme of things. And then the next two I did went horrible. And so I went into them thinking, this is easy. I've done it before. It worked. Like, I just sprayed it and it just worked. Um, and so it's worth noting that, like, when you reverse a plant to make feminized seeds, it's not like a binary outcome. It's not like, oh, this plant successfully reversed or this plant didn't. It's usually like, oh, there's some bananas, but mostly female buds, or it's like all the way through to there's no bananas. And on the other end of the spectrum, it's expressing as if it's an entirely male plant. And so it truly is important to reverse a couple plants. Um, I would say three is a good number, and you'll be fairly certain to get one that will reverse really nicely, and you'll just get like that male morphology, and it's just dumping pollen. That's what you want. Because I've had like two that have just sort of like not really got there. They're not really releasing much pollen at all, and it's like a failed reversal. And so keep that in mind. And if you are making feminized seeds, anyone out there, always have a male backup. Mass Medical taught me this, and it's true because I did this fem run and the fem failed, and I had a different strain. I was also spraying, and I was like, if the main one doesn't work, I use the backup one, and the backup one didn't work either. So like at the end of the
Oh
day,
no.
at the end of the day, you need a male that will produce pollen on cue if it's in the right light cycle. So that'd be a bit of advice too. Otherwise, you'll end up getting a Sensi crop when maybe you were hoping to have some seeds.
Very, very good answer. So we have a few more minutes here. So I'm going to ask you a few more questions. I wanted to get into the other controversial one really quick, which is, how do you feel about testing?
Yeah, great question. Like, just to make sure we're talking the right thing, like THC contents and stuff.
No. Testing your genetics for stability.
Oh yeah, cool. So I think that there's no hard and fast rule, but I think that it's important to be very upfront with what you're doing. So for example, the most recent Raspberry Mama release I had not finished flowering out those plants yet because they were remakes. I had already made those crosses a few years ago. So in that situation, I didn't really felt like it was going to achieve much more than what I already had in terms of the information, because it was like I'm just doing the V2s. So that situation is one where I felt comfortable for it to go out. And then when I did that seed run, I had some new mothers in the room, and those ones didn't really go out because I'm still testing those now because some of the mothers are new. I'm not as familiar with them. I remember I was talking to JJ from Top Dog Genetics a while ago, and he said something that lasted with me, which is like, you probably should test everything, right? But for someone like him, if he's got like a certain Tres dog male he's been breeding with for like 5 years, he sort of knows how that male is generally going to interact with things. And so I'd be happy to accept if someone said to me, hey, look, I've got this male I've had for a number of years. I've done a few different lines with it, like a few different releases, like, maybe 20 strains in total with it. And I know what it works with. I could probably tell you it's not going to pair well with these sorts of strains. They tend to herm. Um, I could accept that and be like, yep, that's I'm happy to accept that. That's reasonable empirical evidence. But I think that if you're making some totally new stuff, it's important to test it, not from necessarily the consumer point of view. Because as Masonic does, he's so upfront. I don't test anything. Like it's not tested, but I'm charging you this price. Take it or leave it. Um, However, the reason why I think you should test it is because it takes 5 years to build your reputation and 5 minutes to destroy it. And I think that's what is really at risk is your reputation. Because, at the end of the day, I don't like if someone's stuff herms on me, it is what it is. I'm never going to get that time back. So it's sort of a live and learn thing. So I think that it's a tough one because, and this is the other thing, if someone grows your seeds and they herm, and you're like, oh hey, I'd like to make it better and send you some seeds, they probably don't want to grow more of your seeds out. um, and so it does leave you in a tough position as a breeder because you might be like, oh, I'd love to make that right for you, but I'm not exactly sure what. So yeah, it's an interesting one to navigate that minefield. But I think above all, as long as you're honest, no one can really criticize you. And if you want to make sure you don't end up with egg on your face, maybe you should test, but you don't necessarily need to.
Everybody has their own goals, absolutely. Um, Before we get going here, buddy, I wanted to ask you, aside from things that you've created, what are your top 3 favorite types of cannabis that you've smoked to date?
Oh, what a great question, man. I I used to have, as I mentioned earlier, I used to have very bad anxiety, like generalized anxiety. So it would sort of just come on sporadically, nothing specifically triggering it. And for that reason, I struggled with sativas. I just couldn't handle them. Um, However, as I got over that, that was probably about 8 years ago. As I got over that, I began to enjoy sativas now to the point where it's like they're definitely my favorite, and they're probably, I can probably honestly say there will come a time when I will only smoke sativas probably. And so as a result, some of my absolute favorite varieties are like unique sativas. I think definitely, if I had to give you three, Genius from Brothers Grimm is one of the most memorable clones I've been able to smoke. It was unlike 90% of sativas out there. It was uplifting and cerebral, but it was very clear headed. It was very focused. Some sativas like Cindy 99, you smoke them and it's great, but every 10 seconds you're like, what was I doing again? Because you got that fogginess. But Genius was the opposite. The name fit, man, makes you feel like a genius. So clear headed and focused, and that was one for sure. I've got to give a huge shout out to like Jack Harris slash Super Silver Haze. It's probably gonna get me clowned on a bit, but being someone who didn't live in America, I've never been burnt out on Jack Harris. I've had some incredible samples of Jack Harris. And I think to me, Super Silver Haze, that keeper cut that you see floating around, is in that same vein of like very racy, very uplifting, piney, terpenoline dominant sativas. I really, really enjoy that. This is probably a very like unexpected answer, but like I love that shit. But the final one would be um, I had most years when I've come over to the States, I've been lucky enough to spend the night before I go home. I would usually spend it at Bodie's house, and I would just get to smoke all this crazy landrace shit, and then jump on the plane all buzzed and fly home. And he gave me, I believe it was Vietnamese number 7. He posts about it on his Instagram. You can see it if you check it out. You'll find it. Vietnamese number 7. It's like, he popped who knows how many Vietnamese seeds, and that was the number 7. Some of the most unique weed I've ever had in my life. Like, so legitimately giggly. Like, nothing is giggly compared to this stuff. Like, oh, my dream would be to like do a comedy show and to force everyone to smoke this on the way in. It would be insane. But yes, so uplifting, so fun. Yeah, one of a kind.
That's a great answer, man. That's cool. We're both musicians. We both appreciate sativas. You do the comedy, the fucking. I've been searching for giggly weed. That's something that I feel that's been lost throughout time. Something that's really been bred out. I can't say I've had any modern cultivars. I don't truly believe that it's something that you can find in a lot of modern cannabis anymore, because everything that affected me that way, I don't think it was a tolerance buildup to THC that did it. I think it was a certain endocannabinoid profile that made that that effect. And I get it with some ties, and that's why I appreciate ties so much. But that is something that I've heard about the Vietnamese, and that's a reason that I've been kind of looking that out. Do you know if that was the Vietnamese gold or the Vietnamese black? Or
I don't want to go out on a limb, but sorry, excuse me. I honestly don't know. It was green, so I don't think it was the Vietnamese black. I think he said that it was like a lowland Vietnamese. He said he thinks of them as like either highland or lowland. I think from memory he said it was lowland. So maybe the highlands turn purple or something, and they're the Vietnamese blacks, or I'm not 100% sure. But I have had a bunch of ties, a bunch of different stuff. I had a very memorable tie from Bodhi, actually. It looked exactly picture perfect, like that infamous photo of Dr. Grinspoon with like just the single alternating calyxes. Yeah, it was really cool stuff. Equally special, uplifting, fun. Yeah, really cool stuff. And I think when I spoke to Bodhi as well, he said that largely speaking, the sort of strains just move around in those areas, and so like Vietnamese Thai, it could be very interchangeable, really.
similar
Mm.
regions. That's
Yeah,
very cool, man. And that's something I definitely want to look into. I cannot wait to do another episode with you if you are ever down for that, because we got to cover
please.
so much. I learned so much about you on this episode. You are very detailed and very skilled in your answers, just like you are when you're interviewing. So I really appreciate having you on as a guest, and you not giving a fuck and sharing your true opinions on these things. It's been very
Uh,
cool.
you're too kind, my friend. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on. I would be honored to come back again and chat some more. And really, really lovely to be able to have a fun conversation with a contemporary and with all the listeners. Really appreciative again.
Absolutely, man. Appreciate you again. All of our Patreon members, thanks for showing up, asking questions for Heavy Days. And until next time, you all have a good night.
Take it real.